In a galaxy rimmed with worlds unseen by human eyes, one planet orbited close to the center of a far-flung star system. The planet, Lyra, was renowned for its beauty. Oceans that glittered in sapphire hues and towering crystal mountains gave it an ethereal quality, making it a destination for diplomats, traders, and occasionally travelers wealthy enough to journey there. Among the people of Lyra were beings as beautiful and strange as their home. Alara was one of them, a young woman with hair that shimmered in various shades under Lyra's twin suns, and eyes that seemed to hold the colors of dawn. Her people possessed a quiet grace and intelligence, but they were bound by ancient customs and a strict social order. To her family, Alara was just another daughter, a piece on their board of alliances and debts. And so, when a debt could no longer be paid, she was the one handed over as payment. Alara found herself on a transport ship, bound and frightened. Her family had sold her to traders, humans who saw Lyra's people as commodities to be bought and sold in far-off markets. She fought at first, her heart pounding with a desperate fury, but it was pointless. She was outnumbered and far from home. She had been taught resilience, but had never imagined this would be how she'd need to use it. Days turned into weeks, and Alara found herself at a sprawling auction on an unfamiliar planet. The air was heavy and stale, filled with the murmur of voices as people moved between the cells where slaves waited to be sold. Alara's heart raced with dread as she saw humans bartering over other captives like livestock. She would have shrunk back, hidden in the shadows of her cage, but she forced herself to stand tall, even in this humiliating state. She knew she was alone. There was no one here to fight for her. Still, she would not let herself be broken. From among the crowd, one figure stood out, a human man with quiet eyes and a steady gaze. He wasn't dressed like a merchant or a soldier. He seemed almost ordinary, yet he watched the proceedings with a keen, observant air. His clothes were travel-worn, his hair slightly tousled, but he held himself with a quiet confidence. When his gaze met hers through the bars of her cage, Alara felt a faint flicker of something she had not expected: curiosity. The bidding began, loud and raucous, and Alara's heart pounded as offers were shouted. She felt her resolve waver, but she held herself upright. Then, unexpectedly, a calm voice cut through the noise with a decisive bid. It was him, the quiet man who had been watching her. With a firm offer, he silenced the others. Her cage was opened, and she was led out to him, shackled and uncertain, but something inside her dared to hope. When she stood before him, he looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen since leaving home: respect. He signed the necessary documents and guided her through the crowd, out of the market and into the bustling streets beyond. The noises of the market faded, replaced by the low hum of the city's energy. He stopped in a quiet alley, away from prying eyes, and handed her a small, metallic object. Her heart skipped as she realized it was a key to her shackles. She looked at him in confusion, and he nodded for her to unlock herself. With trembling hands, she freed herself and stood before him, wary but grateful. "You're free now," he said quietly, his voice calm. "I only bought you so no one else would." She blinked, struggling to understand. "But I am bound to serve you, am I not? I am yours by the law." The man shook his head. "Not by my law," he replied. "If you want to leave, you can. You'll have the means to start over." He handed her a small pouch, heavy with what she guessed were credits, enough to start a new life. Alara stared at him, unsure of what to feel. Her freedom was so unexpected, she could hardly process it. Yet she hesitated, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "Because I know what it's like to be alone in a strange place," he said simply. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, pain or regret, maybe both. "But it's your choice. Go wherever you want." She considered his words, glancing down at the credits, then up at him. He had offered her freedom, yes, but in this alien world, where would she go? She was unfamiliar with the customs, the language, the way things worked. And though she feared becoming indebted to anyone again, she found herself unable to walk away from him. "I don't know this place," she admitted. "Perhaps it would be wise to stay with you, at least for a while, if you'd allow it." He nodded, understanding her hesitation without judgment. "Then stay," he said. "My name is Taryn." They walked through the city together, the first steps of a tentative bond forming between them. Terran was patient, guiding her through the customs of this new world, teaching her the language and the unspoken rules of human society. In return, Alara offered insights into her own culture, the ways of Lyra, and the traditions of her people. She remained cautious, wary of relying on him too deeply, but as days turned into weeks, her walls began to lower. Terran, she learned, was a wanderer, someone without a permanent home. He had traveled to countless planets, seen many cultures, and yet he rarely spoke of his past. Alara sensed a loneliness in him that mirrored her own, a shadow he carried that softened his sharp edges. She didn't pry, knowing the pain of buried memories, but sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, she caught glimpses of a haunted look in his eyes. Over time, Alara's gratitude toward Terran deepened into something else, a feeling she was hesitant to name. She found herself drawn to his calm strength, his gentle humor, the way he treated her as an equal despite everything that had once separated them. For his part, Terran seemed equally affected, though he kept his distance, as though afraid to overstep a boundary she hadn't set. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of a small inn overlooking the city, Alara found herself speaking of home. "I don't know if I will ever return," she murmured, staring into the distance. "But, thank you, Terran, for giving me a choice." He nodded, silent, and she sensed the weight of something unspoken between them. Finally, she reached across the small table, her hand resting lightly on his. "We don't have to be alone, you know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Terran looked at her, his gaze intense, vulnerable. For a moment, the walls around his heart fell, and he met her with a warmth that spoke more than words ever could. Slowly, he placed his other hand over hers, and in that small, simple gesture, they found a connection that went beyond the past they both wanted to forget. As their journey continued, Terran and Alara grew closer, bound by the shared experience of survival, of finding freedom in the unlikeliest of places. They became each other's family, each other's safe harbor in a galaxy that often seemed harsh and unforgiving. In the end, it wasn't the journey or the battles they faced together that mattered most. It was the trust they had built, the love that grew in quiet, unassuming moments. Alara found strength in his kindness, and Terran found peace in her warmth. Together, they carved out a life of their own, a new chapter that neither had expected but both had come to cherish. And in that life, far from the chains of their pasts, they found a freedom they could never have imagined. As Terran and Alara settled into a rhythm together, their journey took them to new, far-flung corners of the galaxy. Each planet had its own unique customs, landscapes, and secrets, and though their lives had found a new stability, danger was never far behind. One evening, as they traveled through a bustling trade port, Terran caught sight of a symbol that made his blood run cold, a crest etched into the side of a ship. Alara noticed his reaction and gently touched his arm. "Terran, what's wrong?" He turned to her, his gaze shadowed. "I haven't told you everything about my past," he admitted, and she waited, giving him space to explain. He took a deep breath. "I once served under a powerful faction. They dealt in intelligence, smuggling, things that made them dangerous. When I left, they didn't take it lightly." "You left?" she asked softly, sensing the weight behind his words. "But you never told me why." Terran hesitated, looking away before finally meeting her gaze. "I thought I could do some good with them, but all I did was add to their power. I eventually saw that they cared only about control. When I tried to leave, they branded me as a traitor. I've been running ever since." Alara felt the intensity of his pain as if it were her own. She had always sensed a deep sadness in him but hadn't fully understood the depth of it until now. "Do you think they're after you?" she asked. "They're always looking," he replied. "I've managed to stay a step ahead, but this could complicate things." Alara understood. She, too, had left her past behind in the hopes of finding a new life. But the realization that Terran's past could catch up to them was unsettling. It didn't scare her away. Instead, it made her more determined to stand by him. "We'll face them together," she said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Over the next few days, they planned their next moves carefully. Terran used his contacts to gather intel on the faction's presence, and they managed to learn of a new leader who had taken over. The leader's ruthless methods had gained him a reputation across star systems, and his network of informants stretched farther than Terran had anticipated. Their only hope lay in staying one step ahead and perhaps, if necessary, confronting his former allies. Their journey took them to a hidden outpost on the edge of a nebula where an informant of Terran's agreed to meet. The outpost was a ragged, dangerous place, filled with smugglers, bounty hunters, and others who lived by their own rules. But Terran knew his contact was reliable. They entered a dimly lit bar, its walls covered in strange alien flora that thrived in the low light. Terran scanned the room, spotting his contact, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and an air of confidence. She waved them over, gesturing for them to sit in a secluded booth. The woman introduced herself as Kala, and after ordering drinks, she leaned in close. "I hear you're in some trouble, Terran." "More trouble than I anticipated," he replied, his voice low. "We've seen signs of their presence everywhere we go." Kala nodded, her gaze flickering to Alara with a brief look of surprise. "And your companion here?" Terran's voice softened as he spoke. "Alara's been by my side through it all. Whatever happens, she stays with me." Kala glanced between them, then nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Well, there's something you should know. They're tightening their net, especially around former associates. Your name came up recently, but I think they're after more than just revenge. There's talk of a secret they think you're hiding." Alara frowned, looking at Terran. "A secret?" Terran's jaw clenched, and he shook his head. "I don't have anything they'd want. I cut all ties." "That may be true, but they seem convinced you've got something valuable. They're prepared to tear through half the galaxy to get it," Kala said, leaning back with a grim expression. The meeting left them both shaken. As they returned to their ship, Terran spoke to Alara in hushed tones, sharing details of his life he'd long buried. He told her of hidden records, encrypted messages he'd stolen in his final days with the faction, information on powerful figures and alliances that could bring entire worlds to ruin if it fell into the wrong hands. Terran had hidden the data deep within a coded relay he'd hoped was lost forever. "So they think you still have it?" Alara asked, her mind racing. "Yes, and if they're this persistent, it means they think they've found clues to where it might be," Terran said, a dark resolve in his eyes. "If we want to stop them, we may have to retrieve it ourselves before they do." Their mission turned from escape to pursuit. They traced a path through hostile worlds and backwater systems, evading bounty hunters and spies as they sought the hidden relay. Alara's quick thinking and knowledge of alien languages and technologies proved invaluable, as did Terran's battle-hardened instincts. Finally, they arrived at a desolate moon where Terran had hidden the relay in an old communications bunker. The place was dark, abandoned, with only the faint hum of failing power cells echoing in the corridors. They worked quickly, navigating the narrow passages until they found the relay, still intact but dusty and neglected. But as Terran began accessing the data, warning lights blinked on the console, a signal alert. They had triggered an alarm, and Terran cursed softly, realizing they'd been traced. "They're coming," he said, his voice tight. "We have to go." But Alara, understanding what the information represented, took his hand. "Terran, this data, it could be the key to their destruction. If we broadcast it to the Galactic Council, the faction's influence would be crippled." He hesitated, looking at her. "If we do this, they'll hunt us forever." She met his gaze, unwavering. "I'd rather spend my life running with you than see a galaxy controlled by them." They worked quickly, bypassing the security protocols to transmit the data to the Council. Just as the final pieces went through, a squad of armed soldiers stormed the bunker, their weapons drawn. Terran and Alara fought side by side, their movements in perfect sync as they defended themselves, their skills and bonds stronger than any force the soldiers could bring. Eventually, they made it back to their ship, narrowly escaping before reinforcements arrived. As they broke through the planet's atmosphere and into open space, Terran let out a sigh of relief. They were battered and exhausted, but they had done it. They had dealt a crippling blow to the faction, and with the Council now aware of its influence, the faction's hold on the galaxy would be weakened. Terran looked at Alara, his heart swelling with gratitude and something deeper. She had chosen to stay with him, to face whatever came, and he realized he'd found in her not only a partner in adventure but someone who had become essential to him. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For everything." Alara smiled, her hand resting over his. "We're in this together, Terran. No matter what." Together, they set a course for the stars, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that they had each other and that, for the first time, they had truly taken control of their own fates. After transmitting the faction's secrets to the Galactic Council, Terran and Alara expected to be on the run again. They were prepared for the faction's retribution, for mercenaries, and even for bounty hunters. But what they didn't expect was a direct message from the Council itself. The Council's message was brief and to the point. Come to Daedalus Prime under Council protection. We need to discuss the implications of your transmission. Alara read the message over Terran's shoulder, her brows knit with uncertainty. Do you think it's a trap? Terran considered the possibility. It could be. But I think they're curious enough about the intel we sent. They'd want to know more, especially since it exposed major council figures involved in the faction's deals. Alara nodded. Then we go. If we can get the council on our side, it might protect us from the faction's forces, at least for a while. They set a course for Daedalus Prime, a planet known for its vibrant trade and political significance. It was the kind of place where secrets could be traded or buried, depending on the price. As they approached, Terran and Alara couldn't help but marvel at the sight. Daedalus Prime was a gleaming world of high towers and floating spires, surrounded by rings of orbiting satellites and ships that formed a near-constant bustle. A contingent of council officers met them upon landing, escorting them through labyrinthine hallways lined with regal tapestries and strange sculptures from across the galaxy. Finally, they were led into a grand chamber where a circle of council members awaited, their expressions a mix of intrigue and suspicion. The council's lead representative, a tall, thin man with silvery skin and eyes that flickered with light, leaned forward, addressing Terran and Alara with a voice that resonated through the chamber. Terran Rowe and Alara of Lyra, the information you transmitted has complicated matters, he began, his tone measured. It's clear you've exposed something we cannot ignore. But before we proceed further, I must know why. Why send this information now? Terran glanced at Alara, then back at the council member. Because that faction has terrorized countless worlds, corrupted leaders, and turned innocents into pawns. I've seen what they do to those who get in their way, and I won't be a part of it anymore. We wanted the council to see the threat you're facing from within. A ripple of murmurs spread among the council members. After a moment, the lead representative nodded. Your actions, though unexpected, may benefit us. However, by exposing this, you have also made powerful enemies within our ranks. Certain factions may seek your capture, or worse. Alara's eyes narrowed. So, does that mean you'll help us, or are we to be sacrificed to keep the peace? The lead council member's gaze softened, almost sympathetic. We may be able to offer a compromise. The council could grant you temporary asylum and protection. In exchange, we ask that you help us root out the faction's influence within our own government. You know their methods, their networks, better than anyone here. Terran and Alara exchanged glances. They both knew the danger of agreeing to work with the council. By doing so, they'd be walking right back into the very system they had escaped. But if they turned down the offer, they'd be left alone, hunted by both the faction and potentially the council itself. After a moment's pause, Terran gave a curt nod. We'll help, but only if we're given free passage when the mission is complete. The council members whispered among themselves before the lead representative responded. Agreed. We'll give you full access to our intelligence on the faction, as well as protection. But be warned. Betray us, and there will be no safe place left for you. With that, Terran and Alara found themselves once more embroiled in a game of espionage. For the next few months, they traveled under the council's protection, carefully dismantling the faction's networks from within. They infiltrated gatherings of elite leaders, sabotaged supply routes, and exposed corrupt officials. But with every move they made, they grew closer to the faction's leader, a man named Kadir, who ruled from the shadows, ruthlessly controlling his vast network of spies and soldiers. He was cunning and relentless, a man who knew how to exploit weaknesses with surgical precision. Then one night, as they were stationed on a distant planet to disrupt a faction trade route, a message came through on Terran's private channel. The voice on the other end was cold, smooth, and unmistakably familiar. Terran Rowe, Kadir's voice drawled, echoing through the small room. Did you really think you could escape me? Terran froze, his heart pounding. Kadir. Oh yes, Kadir continued, with a mocking tone. And I see you found yourself a new companion. A beautiful Lyran, no less. It's a pity you've led her into such danger. Alara stiffened at the mention, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. Terran took her hand, a silent gesture of reassurance, but his mind was racing. Kadir knew where they were. Their location had been compromised. Kadir's voice continued, growing colder. I could have let you run, Terran. I could have ignored your defection. But this little crusade of yours, exposing my contacts, ruining my alliances, you've gone too far. I'll give you one chance. Surrender yourselves to me, and I might spare your lives. Terran's jaw clenched, his voice steady. I'll never go back, Kadir. A low chuckle echoed over the channel. Then you've made your choice. Say goodbye, Terran. My men are already on their way. The channel went dead, leaving a tense silence in its wake. We have to move, Terran said, grabbing their gear. Alara was already by his side, ready. They sprinted through the station, their footsteps echoing against the metal corridors, alarms blaring as Kadir's forces closed in. They managed to reach their ship, narrowly escaping the station as enemy vessels appeared on their scanners, firing at their ship as they maneuvered through the darkness of space. Alara piloted the ship with expert precision, weaving in and out of asteroid fields while Terran handled the weapons, fending off their pursuers with every ounce of skill he had. After what felt like hours, they managed to lose their attackers, slipping into a hidden nebula to mask their trail. Both of them were exhausted, but there was no time to rest. He's not going to stop, Terran said, his voice raw with frustration. As long as Kadir's alive, he'll hunt us to the ends of the galaxy. Ilara's gaze was steady, her hand finding his. Then we finish this, Terran. We end it with Kadir. They knew it was a suicide mission, but there was no other way. Kadir had influence, resources, and information networks that spanned countless systems. But he was still just a man, one they could track and confront. Their final journey led them to the heart of Kadir's operations, a fortress built into the side of a remote, rocky planet. After days of planning, Terran and Alara infiltrated his stronghold, slipping through the shadows, evading guards and security. Finally, they reached the central chamber, where Kadir waited, flanked by his most trusted soldiers. He greeted them with a smug, mocking smile, but they could see the flash of anger in his eyes, a testament to the trouble they'd caused. This is where it ends, Kadir, Terran said. His weapon trained on the man who had once held him in servitude. Kadir smirked. Do you really think you can kill me? I built this empire from nothing. It would take more than 2 rebels to bring me down. But he underestimated the bond between Terran and Alara, the strength they drew from each other. Together, they fought Kadir and his guards with every ounce of skill and determination they possessed. It was a brutal, close-quarters battle, each side pushing the other to their limits. In the end, with Kadir finally defeated, Terran and Alara stood victorious but weary. They had finally broken free from the chains of their pasts, from the faction that had haunted them both. As they left the fortress and watched it burn behind them, they knew they could finally look to a future of their own choosing, a future no longer dictated by fear, betrayal, or captivity. In each other, they had found a partner, an ally, and a love that could withstand even the darkest of times. They set their course for the stars, knowing that, for the first time, they were truly free.